What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another video. In today's video, we are back with another first look draft prospect video, and today we are sticking in the cornerback position, knocking out another one of the top prospects for this year's draft, and this time we go to the Big Ten with Devon Witherspoon out of Illinois. So let's get it started.
Perception. What you see, what you feel when you came down with that?
We know once number two receiver line up on the ball, they like to run slot fade. So honestly, I just played. Come on, guys.
Welcome everybody to my video. Glad you guys are here. And man, I'm very excited about this one. Our third cornerback. I was like, hey, why go to a different position now? We're diving in the cornerback. Let's just continue. And yes, my first mock off season is coming soon, and we will begin to react to your guys' mock drafts and things like that very soon as well. I'm gonna try to do some of those with Rad and things like that. So that's coming soon. But I had to knock out this video first. Okay, I want to get to some of these top players. There's other guys that I still want to get to. As I've said before, the final grades will be on DoseOfDion.com, and also on top of that, there will be prospects over there that will not have videos just because of time reasons. Okay, we don't have the time to put out some of the prospects that maybe just aren't as popular as the others, or they're not the top prospects in the draft. But this was a guy that I've seen on a lot of mock drafts already sent to me, or I've seen on different social media pages. This is a guy that gets mocked to the Lions a lot. Understood, understandably so. Literally the first play, sorry about that, didn't realize that was on. The first play that I watched of this player was actually a clip that I've seen a lot around social media, and I didn't even, anticipate it, because I've seen the clip of him making the big hit against Indiana. I think everybody's probably seen that. If you know about Devon Witherspoon, you've probably seen the big hit that he made against Indiana. It was like the first play of the game. And it was the first game that I actually pulled up, and he smacked the dude, and I was like, oh, that's where that's from. Okay, the first thing I saw of him was that. So it was a great first impression. But this one took a little bit longer. I apologize, just took a little bit longer to do this video. Again, this is the first look, so like I said, final grades will be on the website, so you'll know where I rank these guys. But this one took a little bit longer because one, he's a little bit different. He's very fascinating. That's the biggest thing. There's things that you like, there's things that you don't like, but he's got a very unique play style. Wasn't sure how I felt about this guy for a while. Now I think I have a much clearer picture about it after taking a little bit more time to continue watching this guy, rewatch him, learn about some of his background, things like that. So we're going to dive into Devon Witherspoon today. Again, let me know in the comments which guys you want to see. I understand there's some of these, like I said, some of these I have to knock out. I'm just going to do regardless, and that's one of these videos. But trust me, we will get to some of those players that you guys want to see outside of some of the top prospects. But with all that being said, let's waste no more time, man. Let's dive right into this. If I forgot something, I'll bring it up later. Let's dive right into this. Devon Witherspoon, who is he? So you can see his stats on the left. Like the other videos, we're going to follow the exact same format here. Listed in at about 5'11 and a half, 180 pounds. He is 22 years old, so a little bit older than our last prospect in Christian Gonzalez, wearing the number 31. Probably the biggest thing there is the size. It is a big difference from the last two guys that we've taken a look at. We took a look at two guys that were, basically almost 6'2". So this player definitely falls in a different category. He's also a little bit lighter, in comparison to a guy like Joey Porter Jr. or even to Christian Gonzalez, who are pushing 200 pounds. You got him about 20 pounds lighter than those two guys as well. But if there is a team that is willing, I would say, to get some of these smaller corners and, see if it's going to work and give them a shot, it has been the Lions, whether that's the Jerry Jacobs or the Mike Hughes. However, I think a pushback real quick to that is that when they did sign Mike Hughes, I'm pretty sure the vision was for him to be a slot. They ultimately put him at the outside. You saw some of the limitations, and we saw that when he was with Kansas City. There are limitations. A lot of it has to do with his build. Not to say that, this is a guy with the same size as Mike Hughes, but there are some limitations there. And really outside of that, you have Jerry Jacobs a little bit on the smaller side as well, but he's rocked up. He is a rocked up shorter cornerback, right? So he's extremely physical. So it is a little interesting when you have a guy that's, 5'11", 180 pounds, about which teams are going to be willing to stick him on the outside. Can he physically play through it? You see those limitations, I would say. Like, there are certain guys that look that size, that you can tell they're 170, 180 pounds. You can tell they're undersized. Other guys, you can't tell as much. You kind of have to look for it. And I think that may be more the case with Devon Witherspoon, which is fantastic. Now, his stats on the left are incredible. I will say some of this is attributed to, first off, he didn't face the best receiver competition consistently, at least this past year. Real quick point to that, I thought Ronnie Bell was the guy that he struggled against the most, but Ronnie Bell is one of the more crafty receivers. However, it's not like he got burnt in that game over and over. However, he definitely showed up against Purdue better than other guys I've taken a look at, and also against Nebraska, who has some solid receivers as well. So those were two games that I thought he actually played really well, and specifically Purdue, who throws it all the time. But his numbers are crazy. There were some drops in there. There were some easy drops that he should have given up more yards. And again, that's why the stats are, just something keep an eye on, but it's not everything. However, the numbers are pretty outstanding. 17 receptions on 56 targets, but only 34 were deemed catchable, so a lot of those passes were not. So if you just take the catchable passes 50%, that's still outstanding. But 56 targets, 184 yards, 0 touchdowns. One of the guys to do that, allowed 0 touchdowns last season, with 3 interceptions and 14 passes defended. Now, continuing there, you can see he also has 4 defensive pass interferences called on him last season. He is a little bit handsy as a corner, and we'll talk about that. Now, when you split it into man versus zone coverage, in man coverage and 269 coverage snaps, look at those numbers, man. 13 receptions on 46 targets. Again, only 29 of those were catchable, but that's well under 50%. 157 yards, 0 touchdowns, only the 1 interception, which again, we don't see a lot of interceptions from man, and 11 pass defended, which is great. Now, one thing that's very important to bring up here in terms of being a different player than the last 2 we've looked at. Gonzalez a little bit closer, but because a lot of his man took place in off coverage. They play a ton of man coverage as a team. Illinois plays a ton of man coverage, but a lot of his was in off-man coverage rather than getting up and pressing. Though he did press, a lot of it was in off-man coverage. And then the zone, which they didn't play very much. You can see SIS only has him with 80 covered snaps in zone coverage. 2 receptions, 6 targets, 3 were catchable, 17 yards, 2 interceptions. You see a lot of the ball production usually, and the 1 pass defended there. So heavy man team. I think I read somewhere 75% of the time the team played man, something like that. They played a ton of man coverage. Now, quick little background on Devon Witherspoon. He came out of high school, and he actually originally intended to go to a community college academically. He didn't qualify to go to a D1 school coming out of high school, so he originally enrolled in going to a community college. However, then he had his SAT. He scored high enough so that he could get into Division I, and because of that, very soon after, he got a call from Lovie Smith, who was with Illinois at the time, and he attended the Fighting Illini. And with that, he did one thing that no other freshman did in his first season there in 2019, and that was start a game. He was the only true freshman to actually start a game that season. He played in 13 games, started 3 as a freshman. He actually made a big play that season. But the biggest thing that stuck out to me is special teams, all right? That he was named the special teams MVP of 2019 as a true freshman with 13 tackles. Now, why this is huge to me, because of course the Lions love these guys. They bring it up with everybody. I mean, they brought it up with Jamison Williams. They love guys that have that. And I think it sometimes just speaks to the character of the player. You know, I recently heard from Austin Eckler speaking on how he came into the league. He wasn't going to get reps at running back. He was like the 6'3", but he had to show up on special teams. He had to show up there, and he did. And I think that's very impressive as a freshman to start in 3 games at corner, but then on top of that, also be named the special teams MVP, racking up 13 tackles. That's a lot of tackles for a special teams player. So I love that. Moving to 2020, he missed the season opener that year. That was also the COVID year, so it was limited, but he played and started in all 7 games. 2021 started in 10 games, and then this past season as a junior, because again, that COVID season just gave everybody basically an extra year. He started in 12 games as a junior this past year. So that's just a quick little background on Devon Witherspoon. But again, the thing that I love most there is the special team side, and on top of that, he actually didn't start playing football until he was a junior in high school. So I wouldn't say he's completely raw, but it is something to bring up in terms of technically you could see a guy that, you know, takes big strides, and he actually did through his time in college. He took some big time strides as he got some work early, but there were jumps that he took through the years. All right, so I'm going to start with this press here. Now, I don't think it's always the most technically sound, but there is tons of upside within his press ability, and his quickness is kind of just unreal when you watch him. So let's start there. I'm going to bounce around between good and bad. I know this can be a little bit funky, but that's what we're going to do here. All right, one of the biggest knocks that I have, and this shows up in a couple different areas, but off the press, is when he's trying to get up and utilize kind of that kick slide off the line of scrimmage, and his base just gets a little bit too wide. His second foot really doesn't get into it, and at the same time, he just opens his base up a little bit too wide. It makes it difficult for him to try to open back up, redirect. It forces that extra step, and that's because you think you get him to lunge just a little bit too far. Now, this shows up in the slot. One thing that you do like is that he is asked to shadow a lot of times his opponent's best receiver. Again, they didn't face the best receivers, but for example, a team like Michigan, a lot of times when Ronnie Bell is out there, he shadowed him outside, inside, so he played the slot, and he has that experience of doing that. And I think it does show up here with that two-way go, where you can kind of extend a little bit too far, trying to use that kick slide off the line of scrimmage, but it also shows up on the outside as well. The base is just a little bit inconsistent, and for a guy like him, it shows up in a lot of different ways, but if his base gets too wide, on top of not really having much of a big build there, he could easily be kind of shoved off the line. See, one thing that's has to be brought up here when you watch him is that when he plays in his press, he doesn't necessarily win with his hands. He more so wins and leans on his feet. Now, that's different from what I said about Christian Gonzalez because he doesn't usually utilize his hands off the press. When he utilizes his hands is when he's opening up, and we'll talk about that because I think there's a little knock there. But it's when he opens up, that's when he starts to utilize his hands and get his hands involved. Not like Gonzalez, who's very active at the line of scrimmage into your first step as a receiver. So a little bit different there, but as a whole, the thing about Witherspoon is he's much more of a twitch player than a fluidity player. You get a little bit more of kind of a twitch athlete that leans a little bit more on quickness, that sometimes that looks a little bit choppy, but at the same time, it's like, man, not a lot of guys can move like that. And I guess you would anticipate that a little bit with his build, but it's still pretty impressive because he's not tiny. I mean, 5'11", the way that he kind of moves is actually really impressive, and that shows up a lot in his press, and we'll talk about it. But I think that's the big thing, is just extending a little bit too far, kind of in that kick step off the line of scrimmage, losing his base. And I'll hit this later, but basically this is where I think his first step kind of needs some improvement within that base, is you don't get his feet always working in sync. You kind of get one foot to move, the other one kind of stays back. So in this situation with that base spread out, now he has to try to redirect himself back inside. He's basically hopping off one foot, and then by the time he gets back inside, now his pad level has popped up, and he tries to sit back down and squeeze, and that's all it takes. So as quick and reactive as athleticism is, I feel like technically there's definitely improvements within his game, and it'll probably happen within the NFL, I would assume. We'll talk about his hands in the press in a second, because I think in one area it actually works really well for him, but that's probably the biggest thing there, is his base being a little bit inconsistent. However, talking the technical side a little bit, I do love when he utilizes his motor technique, and I think that fits his skill set really well. Can't use it all the time, but, short distance situations, or when he's using it, when the receiver doesn't have a lot of room to release, maybe on the outside. When he utilizes that kind of motor technique necessarily to take kind of those little inch steps backwards, let the receiver develop and kind of show what he's doing, and then react based on that, is one of the things that I think he does very cleanly, because I think it plays into his skill set. He doesn't have to utilize his hands. He lets you make his move, and because of his quickness and twitch within his feet, then he can open up and get on top of the route. How fluid it looks, and I'll continue to add to that in a second. He has that cat-like quickness, and what it allows him to do is basically mirror a receiver off the line of scrimmage completely, meaning he can basically match every single move a receiver utilizes. Now, that's not necessarily just say that's out of control. He's just kind of all over the place trying to follow everything. He has the feet to do that, but he also doesn't cross his feet. That's a huge thing there, is we talk about keeping that base. While he gets a little bit wide sometimes in that first step to allow himself to, get back into the play and redirect, but what he does do really well is he doesn't cross his feet. He doesn't heel click. The choppiness there, I think, sometimes, again, comes from a little bit of lack of patience within his press release. And I think on top of that, it's really nice when he has a little bit of space off the line of scrimmage, again, because he's not the kind of guy that likes to, squeeze up your airspace. He's not a Sauce Gardner that's, trying to just give no airspace off the line of scrimmage. I actually think he's a little bit better when he's pressing and he gives a little bit of space off the line, because he's not going to utilize and lean on his hands. Maybe that changes a little bit in the NFL, but he's not going to do that right off the line. So for him, when he gets a little bit of space, I think it actually benefits him trying to mirror that release off the line of scrimmage. At times you will see, with his fall step, and this, I don't believe this is something that they teach, but he kind of you'll see he naturally kind of takes that first step forward and kind of sits down a little bit, and I think that can slow him down a tad. But on top of that, his ability to get depth naturally, it can be a little bit inconsistent, look a little bit awkward. Now, while it does look a little unnatural at times, in this situation, receiver's on the ball, he's in the slot, trying to get that depth, and if a receiver pushes up on his toes, sometimes it looks unnatural for him to try to create that depth. But this play, yes, this was very good, very well done against Indiana here early in the season. This one, you get a different look, kind of goes to that kick step to the outside on this one, and because of the route combination, he's kind of squeezed off here, and you can see some of just that base. This time he kind of just ends up opening up the gate here, and because of the route combination next to him, he can't really get on top. I do like how he didn't try to gain connection there through the turn. He allowed himself to try to get back in position, and then you get a play like this, where this is where you kind of get the shoot forward first with that the false step that he utilizes, and that's just naturally what you'll see he does all the time. But then you get him to inch kind of backwards here, stay in front. Now this time, you almost look like he's kind of anticipating this a little earlier, which he's so smart, but at the same time, you can see he's not declaring his hips completely, and he's still able to get in a good position here, even though he was kind of projecting where this thing was going to go early on. So I think when he gets a little bit of space, if a receiver's not on the line of scrimmage, or if he just gives a little bit more space off the line, maybe like 2 yards, 2.5 yards, I think he actually looks a little bit more natural than really trying to get up and just squeeze the airspace off the line of scrimmage. So I think it's just a little bit of a different play style within his game. Very high upside in terms of being a press defender with his footwork. His feet don't always seem in sync, and again, I think a big part of that is mainly his base. When that gets thrown off at the line of scrimmage is where you see issues kind of pile on top of each other when that becomes the case. But as I said, it's unnatural. He's got very unnatural recovery ability within his foot quickness. It doesn't look like it should happen. It's very weird, and it shows up in really every level of the game. I don't necessarily love his, false step off the line of scrimmage, because you will see there's, occasions where he really kind of drops his weight into that false step. And you look at a guy like Gonzalez, he never really changes his weight. His weight doesn't ever shift off the line of scrimmage. He's always in the same position, which is awesome. And he's a little bit taller, a little bit bigger. But with him, I think you get a guy that kind of drops that. It's probably just natural for him to drop that. And occasionally, especially when there's, he's really trying to squeeze airspace, take him just a little bit of an extra tick to open himself up. What I like about him opening up is that he consistently, I would say for the most part, he opens up on very good angles, right? He doesn't open up completely and just open the gate and say, hey, run by me. And he also, he gives like a really good balance of a 45-degree angle when he's opening himself up, and it's set up by his feet off the line. He does a very good job of putting himself in a really good position when he's opening up, not opening too wide, but not also being too flat where he's going to get stacked quickly by the receiver. So he does a really good job, I think, with his timing, number one, when he needs to open up, not opening up too early. See, that's not the thing. I don't think his issue is declaring his hips too early and being, I got to flip back. It's more so just the base off the line and overextending, overreaching. However, what you do like is that when he opens and declares his hips, he's not doing it too early. He lets things happen, and then he opens. I think his timing with that is very, very good. The downside, the thing that I don't love right now, and this can show up, I think, even in off coverage a little bit as well, is that through that transition to open up and turn and run, is that I think you too often get a guy that reaches and tries to get the contact through the turn rather than after opening and then utilizing his hands to get that contact. I think sometimes he tries to do it because he's in a tough spot off the line. Just some of the, impatience there to kind of open and then utilize his hands, because when he tries to use his hands while he's opening up and into that transition, then you get a situation where, again, he could be stacked a little bit and then he can get got behind, and we'll talk about it. But I don't think he has great acceleration, and I don't think he has great top speed either. Now, like I said, he's got ridiculous twitch and quickness, down speed, or even long speed on top of that. So that's probably the biggest knock that I have with him opening up and through that transition off the press. Now, where this kind of ties together in terms of using his hands is he does really well against tight ends, like way better than I would have anticipated. I guess in a way, he kind of gives me Mike Hughes vibes here. Okay, Mike Hughes was really solid against tight ends. Now, Mike Hughes would have issues at the catch point, and we'll talk about that. But in terms of getting on a tight end off the line of scrimmage, and even slower, bigger receivers, he's really good at this early in through the release and through the stem of the route. He gives me Mike Hughes vibes against tight ends because he gets in the chest, he positions himself, squares himself in front, which he loves to do that. He can square himself in front of a tight end because he effortlessly has foot quickness to get in front. And then he usually has the leverage battle, naturally just one versus most tight ends in terms of the size. That's when he can utilize his hands to get on the chest. Now, he doesn't always affect the route. I think that's the biggest issue and why he doesn't do it, because usually it leads to worse results, because he doesn't really affect the route, but he can gain that connection on the tight end, and he really can stick in their hip. He does really well against tight ends in that spot where you wouldn't necessarily anticipate it through the release and through the stem of the route, which again gives him some versatility. And like I said, Mike Hughes actually did that really well. His issue came at the catch point, but in terms of working the release and the stem, he did that very well. The reason I don't think he utilizes his hands immediately off the line and tries to close that airspace is because I think actually more often than not is when he's trying to play that game with the receiver, it actually leads to usually not great results because he doesn't affect the receiver off the release. He utilizes his hands to throw off a timing of the route. Usually it doesn't change much, and if anything, the receiver, if they can swipe off of it, now they end up getting a step, which they probably shouldn't have had because he usually doesn't allow that anyway. So that's probably the biggest thing, is his lack of effectiveness with his hand strength off the line of scrimmage when he's trying to go that route, which usually you don't see him go that route, and I think that's the reason why. Kind of working in through the stem of the route into the top of the route break is that this dude gives me a little bit of a different vibe from the last guy I watched in Christian Gonzalez. He's a little bit more of the, I can't think of the best word for it. He's like a pest. Yeah, he's a pest. I think that's the best word for it. Jacobs is built different. Jacobs is, he's rocked up, so he actually affects the route more so than, a guy like this does. But he's a pest through the stem of the route in terms of he wants to gain that contact. He does the same thing to tight ends, and he wants to control the route. Like, he tries to control the route. He tries to set the catch point. He's the guy that's setting the tone. He's trying to dictate what happens. Where with Gonzalez, I thought, he didn't always dictate, and he wasn't always the aggressor, which I would have liked to see. This guy plays like the aggressor. Like, yeah, I'm going to bully you through the top of this route. And you can see even frustration come out. There was a Nebraska one where at the top of the route, the guy just shoved him. Now, there was no flag called, but he just pushed him. And now you usually don't get an OPI, but that's the kind of corner that you're getting here. You're getting a pest as a cornerback that is just frustrating. I can see why he'd be annoying to deal with because he's crazy quick off the line of scrimmage. And if he matches you there, now he's going to try to bully you throughout the route. And even though he may not be able to, strength-wise, he's going to get in your hip and he's going to be physical with you and he's going to be annoying. And that's the vibe that I get of a press corner, which I think is awesome. I think you love it because then after the route happens, he's going to talk about it. He's going to talk about it. He seems to kind of play with that a little bit of cockiness, which is fine for a corner. He plays with some of that cockiness, but he's going to talk, and you can see it. Not really any guys have production on him. Plays with extreme confidence, pursuit. Like you get all of that tied into one kind of package, and we'll talk about that with run defending. That could just be annoying for an offensive player, and I think that's great for a cornerback.
Now, I'll talk a little bit more about this, and yeah, I do feel like he can be a little lackadaisical when working with these short motions or the fast motions. However, I think a lot of that has to do because he knows he's going to have to utilize this side shuffle, and you can see it's awesome. He doesn't even cross his feet, and he can cover up whip routes, things like that, like this, make it a very difficult thing to throw. He's ahead of this route completely. However, he is an anticipation-styled player, so you will get situations, which we've seen on routes like this, where he'll dive on that first break, and then when they whip back outside, they do create space. They just haven't really targeted him through those. However, with that being said, here's a very good example of kind of that anticipation where we're going to touch on it here in a second, but he's aggressive to it. So you will get situations like this where it almost looks like, he's attempting, like he's going to get ready to break on this, feeling the motion, probably thinking out breaking route. So he's going to break down, but his right foot never hits the ground because then he realizes, oh no, the receiver's going by me, because the receiver didn't change up his speed at all. He ran the same way. He didn't trick him, but he anticipated that there was a break likely coming, so he kind of doubted himself, like he was going to jump down. All of a sudden, the receiver takes off, and now he loses a step. And I think too often you get a lot of these speed releases or speed routes where he's caught in trail.
With that, let's dive into his off coverage a little bit, which he played a lot of here. I'll try not to spend too much time because I know we just talked about that a lot, but let's start with some off coverage here. All right, what you see with this guy, and again, you have to keep in mind the quickness that he has, and I think all of that's great in the transitions here. He plays with good route anticipation, and I think the biggest thing is here is that is good and bad for him. He plays with route anticipation. He feels the route starts to slow. He's going to start to dive and break on it, and that leads to, tough positions where I think a lot of times quarterbacks don't want to go that direction because they just kind of know, like, hey, if I got an in-breaking route and he's sitting there, he's going to break on this thing. So it kind of forces you to keep off.
Now, I do need to point this out just to make sure it's out there, that this is a very smart cornerback. This is a guy that understands based on alignments what they're looking for, based on the splits of receivers, based on the play development, the play formation. We'll touch on those things, but I want to make it clear that this is a very smart cornerback. His coaches have touched on it. You saw it by the opening interview question that he kind of knew what to expect. And yeah, that leaves you to be susceptible, but it also can make you look quicker than sometimes you even are. The athleticism is great, but at the same time, he also has that understanding, the film study, to make himself make plays and get on top of plays, and that is an awesome trait to have, and you see it in his gameplay. How many times he's jumping on routes is not just athleticism.
At the same time, the flip side of that naturally is going to be double moves. Now, you could just project that, but it actually happens. Indiana, there's multiple games that kind of come to mind with Wisconsin where double moves are definitely a part of his game where he will get beat on double moves because he'll kind of anticipate, he'll dive, and then all of a sudden he'll get him over top. Now, again, unnaturally, he has this weird ability where you would think from a guy that kind of just jumps, right? He's going to try to jump the route, that he would be completely lost. While he doesn't have the best acceleration or long speed, he still can somehow have his, complete body leaning forward and then flip himself open. He makes the weirdest transition where sometimes it looks choppy, where he'll actually change his body positioning on one foot. It was a play against Nebraska where the ball wasn't thrown his way, but he was covering a route and he hopped himself back to get into the play.
Now you're going to see that weird athleticism here at the end of the play, but I also do think it's worth mentioning that watch kind of the jam that he gets on this. So again, he has that sidestepping, kind of shuffling ability, and he's able to lower his paddle over here with good accuracy, but he's able to cut off and step in front of routes. He has that leverage feel and awareness to him. But watch this. You see how he kicks off of 1 foot? It's like, how does he do things like that? And he's also aware of where the football is all the time.
He has the ability to kind of pedal himself and weave himself into very good leverage positions, kind of feel it. So if he's playing inside leverage pre-snap, he wants to hold hold that. He can kind of leverage himself into that throughout the weave of the route. He has very good awareness of that and positioning awareness without trying to go too far. However, there are times occasionally where if he's sitting inside leverage where he will give up too much ground. There was a great example where a receiver being a little bit crafty here attacked him and just kept pushing him to the inside and then broke back outside, and he created a lot of space between him and the cornerback, and that's because he continued to give up depth. So I think there's inconsistencies there in terms of how much depth to actually give up, but he does have the athleticism to weave with the route and play that off coverage way. And he doesn't cross his feet, and he can actually match basically every single adjustment the receiver makes. And you're going to get a lot of times where he's in front of the receiver and they'll just run into him. Now these don't get called flags, they could in the NFL, but it's because he squares himself on top of the receiver. If he's trying to get on top of the receiver and square himself in front, he can kind of do it. So it's very tough for you to get him leaning one way and then beat him over top. The way that you get that, which we'll talk about in a second, is kind of through the route. You're not going to though get him to jab and then break back inside and it's like, oh, he's way over here. He can kind of match everything with his feet. So what's great about that is it's less completely on just kind of having to anticipate the break's going to be here and I have to step in front of it. And then if it doesn't, I'm in a bad spot. It's more that he just kind of can do everything that the receiver does, get closer to the corner. And I think where this shows up the most is probably when he's in those cover zero positions, when he's a little bit more flat-footed, when he's kind of playing the sticks because he's expecting the rush to get there and he's not worried about getting burned over top, when he can be extremely aggressive, because when that's the case, now he can kind of match every movement up to the break and then he can get on the break, and that's where he's very difficult. So his ability, I think, to translate to when the Lions go to those situations would be pretty effortless for him.
Now, you'll notice going forward, and as I touched on at the beginning, he is the aggressor at the top of the route. He's aggressor at the catch point, but he tries to dictate and set the tone, and I absolutely love it, but you do have to be a little cautious here. And usually I see the tug and the grab come when the receiver then tries to separate, because he looks to get his hands on first at the top of the route. Not necessarily grabbing, but it's when they tug and try to push back off, then you get the grab. And we know in the NFL it can be called a little bit in favor of the offense, so it is something to watch out for. But a play like this, I love how he sets the tone here.
That ability to transition at the crack of a bat, just pop, right? He sees it go. It's immediate. It's outstanding, and it's weird. Like, it's very weird. You know, a lot of times when guys kind of break down comebacks, you get hit and miss results in terms of can they break down, how quickly can they get back to the ball. He seems to utilize a lot more of the quick step technique, putting a little bit more pressure on his calves, being able to break down in that sense, kind of trying to limit how many times he has to beat the drum to get back, and he really does it. Like, he does it very well. He doesn't use as much, I've seen, of kind of the T technique to break down on the football. He just uses the quick step, and usually it works for him. And I think, again, it's just because that's his game. It's what he can do. He doesn't open his hips too early. He doesn't open himself too early from an off coverage position where now it's like they got him open up and now they're going to break down. That almost never happens. He is very good at when do I need to declare, when do I need to open his hips. Same thing from the press is the same thing on off coverage. When do I need to declare, when do I need to open, and when do I need to turn and run, right? Not doing that too early. Now, as I say that, you will get a guy that I think can do that too late, and this is where you get him to be overly aggressive. In cover zero, it makes sense. Like, hey, we're playing the sticks, we're blitzing, we got to get there. Okay, I get it. Now, we've seen times like this past year where when you get very aggressive and a guy hits you with a double move, which you're not expecting in cover zero to that even get up there, we got burnt. And that will happen. And that will be something that will happen to him, I would assume, especially in his first year, is that in those situations, when he's getting very aggressive, he will get beat over top. Way too flat-footed, way too aggressive in terms of being a little bit more cautious to, this guy could get over top of me. He's less cautious, he's less worried about that and more so about being able to jump the route and get on top of it, and jump a route and make a play on the football. So he's going to be susceptible to getting beat on those. I don't doubt it, especially early in his career. And then his angle breaks are a little bit weird. All right, I talked about his ability to open up at that 45-degree angle consistently. Angle breaks can be a little bit hit and miss in terms of sometimes it's a little bit too steep, and that's when you get a receiver, crafty receivers, right, that kind of can make you feel like, oh, okay, he's rounding this off or he's breaking this tightly, and then he comes back upfield, kind of can change that speed on him because he really tries to anticipate. And what you notice is he anticipates the receiver's speed and kind of the movement of it, but that gets him into trouble because you'll get him taking very steep angles and then they'll pop him back on top, or he'll come out very wide and the receiver's just breaking an out route and you're like, why is he releasing so wide? I do love him when he's facing a fast motion, when he's manned up, he has to cross the field. You do love him. It's that kind of sift ability and slither ability to kind of just work through traffic, and this shows up against the run for sure. As a blitzer it shows up, but it also shows up when he's trying to track something across the field, when he's playing a fast motion or he's playing, you know, a receiver that's crossing the back of the field and he has to kind of work through the traffic as a man coverage corner and still get out there to make a play. When he's covering a crossing route, even without the best speed, how well can he play through that? If he's trying to be set up on a pick, does he's running into guys uncontrollably? like we've seen guys like Okuda, they'll just kind of run into players. He doesn't do that. He has a nice ability to sift through the traffic, to slither his way through the traffic with also not running into his teammates and things like that as well, or getting caught up on pick plays. Now, I do think at times you get a guy that gets a little bit lackadaisical on some of those fast motions where he kind of comes in just kind of walking in there, and all of a sudden they're going way too fast for where the pace that he's moving at, and they'll just hit him with a quick out route. It's like, hey, you got to get over there a lot quicker, because I know you can. Another little thing kind of just nitpicking here is I do feel like through the weave he pops up a tad. Also the transition, you'll notice, like, again, sometimes I think it's anticipation. It's playing a little bit too steep, you know, kind of saying, okay, I'm gonna, you know, be very aggressive here, and because that you'll get occasions where he has to shift his weight at the transition, and that's a problem because he doesn't have that kind of makeup burst necessarily. He's got the twitch, he doesn't have the burst. So you'll get guys that can get that step and stack him, because sometimes he'll have to shift his weight and you'll see him try to drop his weight at the transition or sit himself back up, and that's where you get the problems there, because through the route he's being just a little bit too uncautious, and then you get a guy that has to kind of shift his weight at the transition point, and then that's where you can get him beat over top and things like that. So sometimes it causes him to take a little bit of extra time that you wouldn't love. And again, I think you see, this is kind of a little more projection, but just like in press, I don't think he's extremely natural at getting depth within strictly his pedal. I don't think it's extremely natural for him. Speaking about his communication and his awareness, these are areas where I think he's very good. He communicates very well pre and post snap. He seems to be extremely aware in terms of as the play develops. He has a great feel for adjusting. Okay, I had this guy, oh, the play's developing though, and naturally I know I shouldn't be here, so I'm gonna go get this guy. So he communicates extremely well pre and post snap, and also on top of that, he has a very good feel for play development. You're not, like we talked about Gonzalez, and I said, you know, sometimes he can get kind of lost in the mix, like, oh, the guy can just run him out of the play. That does not happen here. He doesn't play a ton of off man with his eyes always on the quarterback. It's more so just playing the route. And he doesn't get a ton of zone reps, so you don't see as many reps of him keeping his eyes on the quarterback and the man, so you get less of that. But still, he's very difficult to pull out of the play. He's just following something, he's following some eye candy, and he's not going to see where the play is going. I think, honestly, he doesn't allow himself to do that, because he doesn't allow himself to get lazy and get, oh, okay, you know, I'm just going to follow this guy. This probably isn't a route, but I'm going to let it happen. He doesn't let that happen to him. He's the aggressor at the catch point. He's the physical plot guy at the catch point.
Now, I think this ties into the point I made earlier about being aggressive, maybe sometimes in the wrong situations. Here they go with a cover one blitz, so it is a blitz, but maybe still too aggressive on the sticks here, playing very flat to the sticks when this route break happens, which really sets up the entire problem of this route. Now, he does grab a little bit of the shoulder there at the catch point, so he doesn't allow the reception, but it all starts with at the break of that route. With that being said, maybe this one of those spots where you want to just play through the hands, but he's really improved his ability to get his head around to the ball over this past year.
And he is terrific at attacking the ball with timing and accuracy. He is terrific. He uses very good hands. He doesn't arrive too early. He is very good at this. Now, he does get a little bit handsy, okay? And I think this comes back to, again, putting himself in some tough positions in terms of off coverage where he's being a little bit too aggressive, and he gets himself a little bit grabby. He can get a little bit handsy, but he's the aggressor at this point. So against Ronnie Bell, he got called for a PI. A little bit handsy there, a little bit grabby there. But what I do like is that even without having maybe the best length and the play strength, is that he's got great ball timing and accuracy. He punches through. He uses the right hand. He can use his inside hand, his outside hand. He can kind of adapt on the fly. He finds the football. And again, I think this is where you pull back to his twitch again. A lot of times when you see guys like at a comeback or a timing route or a curl route, they'll have to kind of take that extra gather step, and that it doesn't allow them to get to the football. He is one of those rare players that you don't see him have to take that extra step. Like, he has that weird twitch where he can just see it, and at the crack of the bat, bop, oh, I see it, okay, I'm there. Like, it doesn't take him time to kind of wind himself up, shift his way, oh, I gotta fix this. It doesn't. It's like, I see it, okay, I'm here, and then he gets his hand there, and it's unreal. It's an unreal ability that he has that I think guys just absolutely love, and I think that's where a lot of the love comes from this player. Finish it off with his run side of things, and look, again, he's a tone setter. I mean, that's the first thing. I felt like Gonzalez was not a tone setter. That's the word I use. He is a tone setter. This dude hits people. He relishes the opportunity to hit. I think that goes back to him playing special teams. He wants to hit. He wants to be involved. And it's more so than just he's trying to lay the biggest hit in the world. It's on top of that, his pursuit is incredible. It gave me Will Harris vibes. Like, if he sees something completely across the field, he's trying to get there. He is trying to get there. He's not going to just watch it happen. I'm tired. It doesn't happen. He is trying to get there. His pursuit is incredible. You're never going to question his effort in terms of, did he really try to get off that block? Did he let himself get blocked out of that play? You're never going to question that. You couldn't question that. Even if he can't, which usually he can, he is trying to get off. I saw this dude bring out a spin move to get off a receiver's block. I don't even remember if it worked, but he tried. He's like, look, I'm getting there. I'm going to spin off. It's like, why? Who does that? But he's going to try. So while he doesn't have all the gifts in terms of the strength or the length, but he doesn't need the gifts because he just plays so darn hard. He just has that, like, I'm getting that. I'm making a play on the ball. And the same thing with the screen awareness, as we talked about. I think he plays with very good play development awareness. So he will break screens. Now, sometimes that's not great because he's an anticipation player. So there was one screen that they ran the fake screen. He completely just ran into the receiver trying to block. I mean, he just ran straight into him. I was like, man, I hope he didn't hurt himself. But that's the thing. He's an anticipation type of player. He hit as a run defender. I love that. He has the quick feet sidestep, which shows up as a blitzer or to evade blocks. I think it was great against a Michigan offensive tackle when you just saw that ability to kind of sidestep him and get there. Like, he has that, and that's why it's very difficult to block him. In the open field, it's going to be very tough to block this player. You can lock him out a little bit better, but at the same time, as a blitzer, while I didn't see him blitz very much, and the one time I did, I don't think he had any success on it. I think there is probably some upside there to be a blitzer. It's just that if they get contact with him, it's probably going to stall. If he's trying to just get by, he does have the twitch to set up a blocker and get around him. And if it's clean like that, then of course he's going to get home because he's a tone setter as a run defender. He's trying to hit you. 2 tackles against Michigan, almost back-to-back. He just lit up the running back. It's like he doesn't care how big you are. I'm trying to hit the dude. And he lights him up. He will miss tackles. He will overrun. He'll take too steep of angles, and he'll run by tackles. That has happened. And again, usually you can try to get himself back into play. But he will overrun. He will miss tackles. And he's not the strongest guy, so sometimes as he tries to deliver the hit, he's not always getting that pushback like you would see some certain guys if they deliver the hit. You're not always getting that. The biggest thing is that he's trying to set the tone as a run defender. He's trying to make it happen. I think his wrap-up technique could be a little bit cleaner because usually you get a guy that kind of hits and then he wraps. You don't get it all in one fluid motion, so you're going to get opportunities for guys to simply just bounce off of it. But at the same time, he usually comes in with very good pad level. He doesn't tackle too high. I think the consistency of wrapping up in terms of also delivering the blow at the same time could get better, but it's there. The effort is there, and you won't question things like that. You won't question his confidence and ability to hit anybody that comes his direction. And I love all those things about the player, and I can understand why a lot of people would. The biggest thing is I think he hits on the biggest traits that you need. The athleticism traits, the speed.
Now, while I love his twitch, and I think his acceleration should be fine in the National Football League, it should be adequate, I don't love his long speed, but again, I think he can get away with it, but that means he's going to probably need improvements to get himself into their spots, whether that's improving his press techniques or in off coverage, whether that's sitting in leverage, being less aggressive, but improving again within those leverage sets, because for him, there was way too many times where I saw him in trail and he's chasing guys. When you're in off coverage, there's a lot of field, and even though in a lot of these college games, they couldn't expose him, the NFL will expose you if you're consistently chasing guys. That must get better. I think the speed's fine, but he cannot be chasing that often.
And the ball skills. He hits on the most important traits for a cornerback, and then on top of that, he brings that dog. He brings that dog mentality. Now, technically, not the cleanest cornerback. Limited in certain areas, yes. I think he would transition well to the Lions in those third down areas. I don't necessarily think he transitioned great if you're asking him to close airspace at the line. I just don't think that fits him. He can play man, but he's not the cleanest man corner I think there's out there. On top of that, he will get beat over top. For the great plays he'll give you, he'll give up things as well. I think there's polish that needs to be added. I think his base is hit and miss. And on top of that, he's not the guy that you're going to want to go ask to say, hey, go be physical and close the airspace. Don't let that route get started. He will let the route get started because it doesn't fit him to play that way unless he bulks up and puts on this big-time weight, which I don't know if he can. I think he came out like 170. Now he's listed at 180. So maybe he can. Maybe he could put on a little bit more there, but he doesn't have a big frame. So I think it might be a little bit limited in terms of that. For the Lions, I don't know if schematically this is ideally who you're looking for, but I do think that it's unquestionable the kind of athleticism and twitch and reactive athleticism that he has, which is just, it feels rare. It really does feel rare in that sense. So I think someone's going to take a shot on him, and they're probably going to be pretty happy with him. Do you kick him inside? Do you kick him outside? I think he'll probably stick on the outside. There could be a world in which he's better as the nickel corner than the outside corner, but I think what's big about him, and unlike Mike Hughes and unlike Christian Gonzalez, is that he tries to set the tone at the catch point. He is the bully. Even though sometimes he's not, he tries to bully you at the catch point, and I love that. He plays with a different mentality, and he doesn't look small because of that. Let me know your thoughts, comments below. Again, final grades will ultimately be on DoseOfDion.com. Thank you, Prop, for watching. How do you feel about Devon Witherspoon? And I'm out.